Syndrome of retroactive memory. Detroit, 2:47 a.m. The operating room breathed evenly. The ventilation, the beep of monitors, the rhythmic drip from the IV pump. The lamp's light cut away everything unnecessary, leaving only the pale face of the patient and Marcus Eldridge's latex-covered hands in its circle. He finished the last stitch on the temporal lobe, slowly withdrew the needle, and set it on the tray. The anesthesiologist nodded, stable. Marcus lingered a moment, his gaze fixed on the monitor, as if checking not just the pulse, but something invisible, beyond the scope of medical readings. Everything had gone perfectly. A benign tumor, minimal compression of brain tissue, prognosis, good. Yet a residue clung to his chest, the kind he habitually blamed on caffeine and the 6th hour of the night shift. He had always done that when he couldn't explain a feeling, ever since that spring when he didn't make it to his sister's ICU in time. An aneurysm had taken her half an hour before he arrived from another city. In the staff room, the phone rang. The screen said Mom. He pressed decline, set his cup on the edge of the table, and didn't notice the thin crack spreading through the porcelain. 2 days later, the patient regains consciousness. The first thing she said wasn't a name or "where am I," but in a calm, almost businesslike tone. "Tomorrow, there will be a fire in my building." Marcus chalked it up to disorientation, but she went on. She named the time, the floor, her neighbors' last names, and an odd detail. The elevator would get stuck with a man and a child inside, the boy wearing a red jacket. The next day, he heard it on the news. A fire in that exact building, no casualties. The woman, sensing something was wrong, had insisted people leave the elevator and called the fire department. Everything matched. Back at the clinic, she avoided his gaze. "Doctor, when I close my eyes, it's already happened. But then, no," she said quietly, handing him her MRI report. The conclusion read, "Variation of the circle of Willis, microischemic changes in the hippocampal region." The chill beneath Marcus's skin wasn't from fatigue. This wasn't just a patient before him. Possibly someone who remembered the future, but only the kind that would no longer come to pass. A month after the first fire, Marcus already had 9 cases. The pattern repeated, but the faces were different, and that perhaps was the most troubling part. Elias Ford, 32, warehouse shift worker. At reception, he spoke quietly, without raising his eyes. "It's not a dream, more like a memory without a date. You know it happened, but the calendar is blank." He remembered a tanker overturning on the highway, and in his picture, he changed the truck's route in advance, avoiding the traffic jam and accidentally ending up by a convenience stand selling instant lottery tickets. In the previous version of himself, he won big. In reality, he did change the route. There was no traffic jam, no overturned tanker, but Elias still bought a ticket. Won a small amount. 3 days later, a residential building caught fire on the next street over. Among the injured, the woman who ran that very lottery stand. "I'm not greedy, doctor," he justified himself too quickly. "I just thought, if it comes, maybe you can, steer it?" Marcus said nothing. He noted, skin pale, hands trembling. Trigger phrase, "if it comes." Smell, sharp, like spilled gasoline. Office temperature, 72 degrees. Deborah Klein, 41, music teacher. Wore a small cross, spoke uncertainly. "I don't believe in miracles, doctor, but when it hits, it feels like someone's calling me, like a voice whispering, 'Don't let it happen.'" She had stopped the children from going on a trip. In the other version, the bus went off a bridge. Everything was canceled. A week later, a concrete awning collapsed at the school entrance, killing the father of one of the girls. "I interfered with something I shouldn't have touched," Deborah said, hiding her hands in her sleeves. Marcus recorded. Trigger phrase, calling. Smell, damp cardboard. Temperature, 70 degrees F. Aftermath, persistent guilt. He kept his journal like a map of traces, not only the plots repeated, but also the sensory anchors, certain words, smells, a slight chill before the memory without a date. The more actively the patients intervened, the denser the swarm of new episodes became. Elias began waiting for tips, switching shifts and routes to catch a profitable outcome. Instead of peace, he got trembling fingers and empty eyes in the mirror. Deborah prayed more often, but each time it receded, something else came, as if the space couldn't remain empty. At night, Marcus flipped through his notes, catching a pattern that neither MRI scans nor psych protocols could explain. Each episode had an imprint, and that imprint returned, even when the event itself was erased. The first real alarm bell came with William Hayes, a bus driver who remembered an accident at an intersection, a truck running a red light, an instant impact, dozens injured. In his recollection, he braked in time, and the truck sped past, and so it happened, no accident. 2 days later, a residential building in the same area caught fire, 3 dead. Among them, a woman from Hayes's account, one of the passengers he had saved. Such coincidences multiplied. Sarah, who had prevented a mass food poisoning in a school cafeteria, learned a week later that a staircase collapsed in the next building, killing several parents. One of them, in her recollection, was supposed to die in that cafeteria. That evening, Marcus reviewed data from all 9 cases. One common sign stood out. MRIs showed variations in venous drainage and anomalies in the circle of Willis in all of them. Coincidence or key? He didn't know. The next day, he discussed it with neurophysiologist Dr. Lanier. "Strip away the mysticism," she said, flipping through scans, "and you might think we're dealing with unstable synchronization between the zones responsible for episodic memory and prediction." "And if we don't strip it away?" Marcus asked. "Then it's like a debt trap, entropic debt. The world doesn't tolerate holes in probabilities, doctor. You close one, it stitches the gap with another fabric, sometimes more crudely than before." Elias, ever pragmatic, tried to play with this hole. In the previous version, he won the lottery, so in reality, he secured a small win. Pleased with himself, he even bragged to Marcus that nothing bad happened. 2 days later, his younger brother was in a car accident, returning from that same lottery stand. Deborah, by contrast, drowned in guilt. After the school awning collapse, she came to the clinic with inflamed eyes. "I interfered with God's will," she said, staring at the floor. "And now they took him right at the school door." Marcus wrote in his journal, "Compensation appears in everyone. Form varied. Degree higher when intervention is for gain. Guilt and fear when the motive is personal." And in the silence of his office, he understood more clearly. Perhaps the only thing worse than the event itself was stopping it. With each new case, Marcus saw it more clearly. These people weren't just patients, but living archives of events that no longer existed. They carried entire versions of reality erased from the common timeline. Sarah once said, softly, as if afraid the walls might hear, "Sometimes it feels like I've got other people's lives in my head, and they move." Elias kept records on his phone, voice memos with terse lists, date, place, outcome. In one file, you could hear him nervously flicking his lighter, pausing between words. Deborah used an old-school map of the city, sticking pins in it, green for saved in time, black for couldn't save. Sarah carried a notebook with 2 columns, saved and vanished later. The handwriting varied, sometimes neat, sometimes shaky, as if written on the run. Marcus saw these methods of recording as both tools and anchors. They couldn't rid themselves of the burden, but neither could they let it go. He entered it all in his journal and increasingly found himself leafing through it like someone else's biography, though each page felt like his own. One evening, at home, he pulled an old plastic card from a drawer, the ID bracelet of a patient who had died of a stroke 10 years ago. Back then, he was a young resident, too late to spot the downturn. The card lay cold in his palm, and he realized he held it the same way his patients held their maps and notebooks. He understood. For them, memory wasn't just recollection. It was a place to hide what the world had already erased. And if they let it go, the erasure would be final. Yet he still didn't know which was worse, carrying these shifting lives inside or letting them vanish forever. Marcus resisted the idea of interference for a long time. He was trained to heal, not erase. But each new story convinced him. The chain had to be broken, even if it went against his oath. For the experiment, he chose Liam Rowe, a 27-year-old firefighter who'd undergone a craniotomy after an on-duty injury. Liam remembered the collapse of an old bridge in the suburbs, cracks in the supports, screech of metal, screams from trapped cars. In his picture, he managed to block traffic, saving dozens. Before the procedure, Marcus called in an anesthesiologist and an ethics consultant. "We're not treating an illness, we're interfering with the course of events," the consultant said, arms folded. "If I don't do this, people will die," Marcus replied. The anesthesiologist added quietly, "And if you do, they may die differently, and you know it." Marcus fell silent. He had no answer. The operating room was quiet. Liam was put under light anesthesia. The equipment for targeted hippocampal stimulation was ready, thin electrodes to sever the trigger episode associative pathway. In theory, it would erase a single memory without damaging the rest. The procedure was quick. When Liam woke, he looked slightly puzzled, but calm. Asked about the bridge, he only shrugged. "What bridge?" Marcus was about to close the file when Liam suddenly asked, "Did I already call my mom?" An ordinary question, but it pricked Marcus. In that small gap, there was something more frightening than all his theories. 3 days later, the news broke. Bridge collapse. 23 dead, including several families headed to a Sunday fair. The scenario matched the one exactly, only now it was real. Marcus tried to convince himself the experiment confirmed the hypothesis. Remove the memory, and the world reverts to the original outcome. But inside, he felt something else, that he had become part of a mechanism of retribution, proving that reality had the right to its original course. By morning, the staff room was silent, broken only by the hum of the medication fridge. On the table before Marcus lay 2 lists. Erase memory, 6 names. Preserve, 4. He'd been rewriting them all night, shifting names from one column to the other. The pen scratched, the tea in his cup went cold and filmed over. The phone rang. He picked up. The voice was hoarse, agitated, one of those whose memory he'd decided to keep. "Doctor, it came again. I saw—" A pause, the sound of breathing. "I can't stop it." Marcus closed his eyes. For several seconds, only breathing came through the line. Then the call ended without his reply. He remembered Sarah's words, "These stories want to come back." His gaze fell again on the lists. Fingers gripped the erase page. The paper crumpled slightly, and in that moment, it was as if he blinked with someone else's eyes. Another desk, a stranger's lamp, and on the page, only one name, his own. He flinched and opened his eyes. The familiar desk again, the lists, the pen. An hour later, he signed the orders. 3 would keep their memory. 7 would lose it. That evening, when it was done, the patients went home. Some relieved, others with eyes already reflecting unspoken pictures of the future. Marcus stayed in the staff room. Outside, snow fell, a rare spring sight in Detroit. He traced the edge of the desk, feeling splinters in the wood, and for the first time thought not of diagnoses and statistics, but that his own place on these lists had already been decided somewhere. A month passed. Marcus sat in the staff room again, scrolling through incident reports. He did it automatically now, searching for familiar names. Those whose memory he had erased died or were injured in other circumstances, not as their predictions had foretold, but with the same ending. Liam Rowe, who had avoided the bridge collapse in his former vision, drowned during a training exercise while saving a rookie. Sarah, stripped of her visions, died in a stray shooting. Those whose memory he kept survived, but lost loved ones. A man who had prevented an explosion at a factory saw his wife killed in a car accident a week later. A woman who had saved her daughter from a non-event disaster buried her brother, who happened to be at the scene of a new tragedy. The world seemed to compensate for every intervention, leaving no debts unpaid. One night he woke with the sense someone was in the room. In the dimness by the door stood a man. "You don't know me, doctor," he said softly, "but you saved my sister. I remember that. And something else, something that's already gone." "And what are you going to do with it?" Marcus asked. "I don't know, but I think now it's your turn to forget." When the door closed, Marcus sat in silence, and then a sudden alien flash. He was standing on a rooftop, snow crunching under his boots, a woman's scream below. Click, and the vision vanished. In his journal, he made one last entry. "We don't change the weight, only shift the burden. The weight remains." The silence was broken by a soft knock on the door. Or maybe it was the sound of a message arriving.